Hurricane Irma, which is now a Category 1 storm, is still a major threat as it moves up the Gulf Coast in Florida and turns to its next target, Georgia, Alabama, and surrounding states. Irma is a storm of historic magnitude as it swept through the Caribbean and into Florida. Now, here is the latest. An estimated 25 storm-related deaths in the Caribbean and 5 so far in Florida. Massive wind damage has been widespread. There are states of emergency in Georgia, Alabama, and the Carolinas. In fact, Atlanta issued its first tropical storm warning ever. Over 5 million people in Florida are without power, and that may go on for a long time. Storm surges and flooding have happened, and still more is expected across many parts of Florida. The federal government is throwing the full weight of its resources into the state. 13,000 federal workers are already committed, and there are supplies in more than 7 million meals, 10 million liters of water, generators, tents, and medical equipment also ready to go into the state. As I said, folks, Irma has been downgraded to a Category 1, but still you have sustained winds upwards of 70 miles an hour in the Tampa area. It's expected to move through the northern panhandle of Florida, then, of course, impact several other states. And so those states are also issuing warnings to people not to simply believe that Irma has petered out. One of the areas we're talking about is also the coastal area in Georgia as well, where it will be impacted in terms of this particular storm. And so just because you're hearing the reports, folks, what's happening there in Naples, what's happening in Orlando, the Miami area, also now Tampa, do not think it's not going to impact people in Georgia, in North Carolina, even parts of South Carolina. Many of those areas in North Carolina are still trying to recover from last year's hurricane, Hurricane Matthew, that destroyed a number of rural towns. We're seeing the possibility that it could exist as well. Also, keep in mind, although the wind is moving out, you still have flash floods that are taking effect as well. The ground has been saturated, and so keep that in mind as well. Let's go to Orlando, Florida. We'll talk to Congresswoman Val Demings, a Democrat from the area. Congresswoman, first and foremost, thank you for joining us on TV One.
Well, good morning, Roland, and thank you so much for having me on this morning. I tell you what, I heard you say that, you know, to the listeners, don't believe that Category 1 means you're safer or out of danger, because I'm actually looking at Category 4 winds right now, and this is still a very massive, very dangerous storm.
In terms of Orlando, what was the impact on that city? Orlando is in central Florida. That's what it's considered. And so many people don't expect to see this type of damage in Orlando or even the Tampa area.
You know, it's so funny. When we first started talking about this storm, of course, a few days ago, and then we knew it was approaching Florida, we said there was a high probability that every county, all 67 in Florida, could be affected by this storm just because of the massive size of it. And what we've seen is exactly that. You're absolutely right. We're in central Florida. Early reports was that the storm may cut directly through the center of the state. We knew we would be directly impacted then, and then the storm shifted in a more westerly direction. But guess what? Last night, the direction changed a bit, more east, and Orlando has been directly impacted by the storm. We have hundreds of thousands of people without power. We have hurricane force winds, several tornado warnings, and if some flash flooding concerns. I mean, this storm, although we went into a curfew yesterday at 7, yesterday evening at 7, and it's supposed to end at 6 today, these last few hours have been pretty intense.
And when you talk about obviously it being intense, and again trying to warn people, they have not done assessments yet in terms of structural damage, in terms of bridges, in terms of power lines being down as well. That could still be a problem, and so folks are warned not to hit the roadways.
That's absolutely correct. And I think a lot of people don't know that a significant number of injuries and deaths actually occur after the hurricane, because people who have taken the precautions will venture out without really hearing from emergency management personnel. And so it's so very important. As I said, we're under a curfew until 6 o'clock this evening, but we aren't really certain that at 6 o'clock things are going to be better. So we just really, plead with the public to follow emergency personnel's direction, public safety direction, and just wait until you get an all-clear word.
You talk about public safety, and of course, you served as chief of police in Orlando, and so you're not just speaking as a member of Congress, and so you understand the tough job that law enforcement has in situations like this.
Roland, I tell you what, I spent 27 years at the police department, and I have vivid memories of working many storms. This is really the first time that we've had a major hurricane hit this area that I have not been working as a law enforcement officer on the ground. I remember 2004 when we had 4 hurricanes, if you remember, come through Central Florida, which was an unusual hurricane season, Charlie, Francis, Jean, and Ivan. And so you're absolutely right. I know exactly what goes on during situations like this. And so I find myself in a little bit of an awkward position, but I tell you what, on Friday we were able to vote in the House on the hurricane relief package, and that really felt good to be able to do that, to bring some relief to the Harvey victims as well as those that are impacted by Irma. And that particular relief package passed overwhelmingly, as we certainly would expect it to in the House.
Great concern many of us have is the folks who don't have resources, who cannot evacuate. In terms of what about them, how do you move forward, offering them assistance? Of course, power may be out. I remember Hurricane Alicia when it hit Houston in 1983, and the eye of the storm passed over my home in the Clinton Park area. We were without power for 2 weeks. What is it looking like there in the Sunshine State?
Well, I tell you what, like I said last night, the last report was 154,000 people in Central Florida without power. That number has certainly increased this morning. But I got to tell you, emergency management personnel here in Orange County gave a mandatory evacuation order early on to persons living in mobile homes, which was, even though the direction of the storm had changed somewhat, and it looked like Central Florida was not going to be as directly impacted, that warning was given early. And we know, I certainly understand how difficult it is for people to evacuate. Many do not have the resources, and we are certainly sensitive to that. But we opened up several shelters in Central Florida, and transportation was being provided. And so for those persons who may not have the resources, we did a really strong push to encourage them to go to one of the local shelters.
Right now, I have, this is a live radar up of the storm as we see it right now. This is from my radar from their app, and literally the entire state of Florida, the upper portion is covered in rain. As I move this up, we see still some rain in the St. Petersburg, Tampa area, as well as Orlando, but so much of this now is spread across the top part of Florida. Now we're talking about Georgia, Alabama as well, and it's going to be moving a lot of this rain moving into and wind into Atlanta, into these areas. So that's major in terms of the surrounding states of Florida.
Yeah, and as we saw with Hurricane Harvey, the flooding that occurred in Texas. In Florida, the major concern for us, certainly those coastal areas, we've been concerned about flooding. But the major concern for us has really involved the wind. And as I said earlier, Roland, when we first started these discussions, we said this is a storm because it is bigger than Florida is wide. That could impact all 67 counties within the state of Florida. Now, when we heard those early reports, it was just hard to really believe that was true. But I can tell you, I've been here on the last few days. This is a massive, dangerous storm that has impacted the entire state of Florida.
All right, Congresswoman Val Demings, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Weekdays on TV One.
I will never lie to you.
Oh, my God.
Roland Martin.
He doesn't want to talk to us. He wants to ignore us.
Uncensored.
Hell no.
That ain't gonna cut it, boo.
Unapologetic.
No, that is fundamentally false. You are wrong.
He
Unfiltered.
wants an America where we all look alike. He ain't talking about black people.
Unrelenting.
You better go work out, because you got a fight on your hands.
NewsOne Now with Roland Martin. Weekdays at 7 a.m. on TV 1.